My name is Mike Panaki. I'm owner of Network Protocol Specialists here in Seattle, Washington. For the last 10 years, we've been offering the CCTT training program across the country. So we're really excited because we're starting to launch the online training. In fact, next week, Tuesday and Wednesday, are going to be our first online training where we're doing this. We're allowing you to remotely access the Versiv so you can go in and do the exercises. We're doing the testing online. So for anyone that hasn't been able to come to a in-person class, this is a great way to get that training, okay? So let's jump right in and, well, also I just want to mention, we're not stopping our in-person training and our on-site training. This is just an addition to what we're already doing, okay? So I've given you the login information for getting into the Versiv. So in this next little section that we're going to go through, if you want to click through the Versiv and follow along, I highly encourage you to do so. So what we're going to do is we're going to connect to one of the Versivs that I have here in my office. So what I'm going to do is come in and I'm going to share my screen. So we'll hit share on there. And I'm going to type in the IP address of this Versiv that I have in here. Okay. And I'm going to connect to that. Now, this is kind of one of those little hidden features with the Versiv, and that is the fact that I can come in here and I can connect to this via VNC. So it's kind of a neat little feature for remoting into it, and it's especially nice if we're teaching a class and I want to show you something on my screen, or I want you to be able to connect in and get into that. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about how we can set up a test even if the module isn't in the Versiv. So right now, up here at the top of the screen, we can see it says it's got the DSX 5000 module in it. So that's the module that's installed in the tester right now. Well, let's say that I'm sitting at my desk and I want to be able to set up a test for testing fiber. I want to do an OLTS Tier 1 test. So in this case, I could go in and I could swap the modules, but even better yet, I can come in and I can set the test up without even having to swap the module. And what you'll find is that the units we have here in the classroom don't even have modules in them, but we can still set up all of our tests. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here, I'm going to tap on my test right here. Now on mine, it's set up as a TIA Cat5e. On yours, if I come over here and take a look, yours probably say Cat6a. That's the default test. So I'm going to select that test right there. Now mine shows all these tests that I've already set up. So if you click on that, what I can do is I can come down here to the bottom and I can click on New Test. So now when I click on New Test, it brings up my new test setup. So this is where I can come in, I can set my cable type, I can set my test limit, and I cannot overemphasize how important it is that there's a difference between those two. Our cable type helps us set our nominal velocity of propagation. Our test limit sets what we're testing to. I've gone into a number of locations where they thought setting the cable was good enough. It's not. But in this case, what we want to do is we want to set up a fiber test. So what I'm going to do is come up here, and I'm going to click on module. And what you probably noticed on yours when you clicked on it was it brought up all the modules because there was no module in it. But now it shows me my different modules. So I've got my cable analyzer. This is my DSX 5000 and 8000. I've got my Certifiber Pro OLTS, my optical loss test set. I've got my OTDR, my optical time domain reflectometer. And I've got my Fiber Inspector Pro. Now, Fiber Inspector Pro is where I connect my fiber inspection scope via the USB port to my Versiv mainframe. So what we're going to do is we're going to select Certifiber Pro OLTS. It's going to dig us in a little bit deeper. And it's going to say, which module do we have in there? Now, in our case, we're going to say, we're going to set this up for the quad module. So I will select quad. So now what you'll notice is our settings in here have changed to match up with that particular module. So it's going to ask me, what type of test am I doing? So in this case, I could say, we're going to do a smart remote. We're going to set this up for a smart remote. And that's where I have a remote at the other end with an OLTS module in it. So I'm doing testing on both fibers at the same time, and that's going to allow me to measure what the loss and the length is of those fibers. I could do a loopback test. This is just where I want to test a single fiber. I could do a far-end source test. The far-end source test would be a case where I have a simplex fiber. So let's say I'm doing something like installing a security camera, well, where I only have a single fiber running out to that security camera. In this case, I could go in and I could use this to test that with a light source at the far end. Or I could do a fiber inspector test. So we'll stick with smart remote. Now we've got bidirectional. Now this is going to determine whether we test the fibers from both directions. And this is going to require switching the fibers when we go in and do this test. Well, typically not required. This would be something that, depending on our contract, we would want to take a look and see. Now, very importantly, we would select what our fiber type is. So in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to click on fiber type. Now, this is where it shows which fiber types we've last used. In this case, we're going to go ahead and choose OM4 multi-mode 50. So it's going to be our 50 micron OM4. Now, what this does, by setting that fiber type, that is going to set the modal bandwidth that we have for that fiber. That modal bandwidth is going to dictate which applications can run across this fiber. So if you're going in and doing certification, it is very important that we select the right fiber type. If we don't select the right fiber type, then the applications that we're going to get on our report are not going to accurately reflect what that fiber is capable of. And the customer may come back and say, hey, look, you told me we could run this particular technology across there, and it says on the report you can't. You don't want that to happen. So going in and setting up these parameters properly at the beginning is critical. And this is why, just to reiterate, that CCTT training, this is what we spend an entire day on with the fiber, is going through and talking about what settings are out there and why those settings are so important and what they can impact. Now, if we go to our fiber type settings, in this case, this is going to give us our index of refraction. Now, depending on the type of fiber, our index of refraction is based on the speed of light and the speed of the light going through the fiber. And so this gives us an idea of how long that fiber is. So we're going to use that index of refraction when we go in and measure that fiber length. Now we can set our test limit right here. So I can choose from my different test limits. And in this case, I'm going to go ahead and choose 10 gig base SR. Now, this again depends on what we're testing this to. In this case, we're going to choose to test this to an application. So we're going to deploy 10 gig base SR across this fiber. We want to make sure that's going to work. So I'm going to select 10 gig base SR. So once I've done that, I've now set up my test. Now I can select my reference method. And unless there is a very, very specific reason to use something like 3-jumper method, we would always use the 1-jumper method. This is going to provide us with the most reliable results. I select my connector type. We're going to see that selecting the connector type has one impact on one thing, and that is when we do bidirectional testing, whether we auto start the bidirectional test or not. And that's a little beyond what we're going to cover here in this little short webcast, but that connector type really impacts what happens automatically when you select bidirectional testing. Then we've got our number of connections and splices. And if we click on that, this gives us this nice little display right there. And that display shows us the number of connections we have, the number of splices, and what jumper reference we're using. This is all going to go into figuring out what our limits are. So we can go in, we can measure the length, we can measure, we know based on here the number of connections, we know the number of splices. This helps us calculate our loss limit, and then we can determine whether that fiber link is going to pass or not. So I can click on Done down here and get rid of that. Okay. We'll move that up just a little bit. So now I've set this test up. So I've got my test set up. Now, we do not want to click on the little X up here at the top. That's cancel, so that we would lose all these changes we just made. What we want to do is come down here and click on save. So now we've created this new test up here. Okay. So if I say use selected, it says, I've got a cable ID set that doesn't match. Now, in this case, I need to set up cable IDs that we've said are going to be used for fiber. So I can come in and I can say new cable ID set, and I could come up here. And what I found when I'm using this remotely is, even though I can use the keyboard, things tend to work best if, so I'll put 001A. Now, this is the neat thing with our cable IDs. It auto-populates that. And if I come down here and I say 12B, what this is going to do is it's going to create cable IDs for me that go 001A, 1B, 2A, 2B, all the way up to 12B. So I'll say done. And now I would say create fiber IDs. I say, what am I testing? I'm going to test loss and length. Okay. So now I hit save. All right. Let me choose a different ID set here, because I've already chosen overlapping with some I've already created. There we go. So I already had the cable IDs I set up from some previous tests. So now I've got those all set up, and I can say use selected, and I'm ready to go, ready to start doing my testing. Okay. Now, the other thing I want to show you in here real quick, and I'm going to stop sharing, and we're going to come over and we are going to switch cameras here. So we're going to switch over to our mainframe. And I'm going to grab out the OLTS module right here. So I've got my module. So instead of having to turn this off, I can just come back here. I can flip my little levers. You notice that it says home. Let's make sure we got that all aligned properly. We're going to slide that module in. And now there's our CertiFiber Pro. So we can hot swap modules in there. We don't have to, turn this unit off. We've built our test. We're ready to go in and start testing, but we're not quite ready because we'd have to set reference, things like that. Okay. So one of the things that we run into, there's a couple little things that you might run into as a challenge when you're clicking around in those remote Versivs. This is something that we're working on to get fixed. They were never really intended to be run remotely. All right, so on my little checklist here of things that I wanted to demonstrate today, another one is using the main as a remote. Let's say you're out in the field, you got two mains, but you don't have any remotes with you. How do we go in and test that? Well, that's where we can come in here. Let me share my screen again. I'm going to come in and I'm going to go to Tools. And what we're going to see right at the top of the tool screen is Main as Remote. There we go. So now my main is a remote. So this is a great way to be able to go in and set this up as a remote end. So if I have two mains, I can use a main as a remote. Now, here's a really cool one. If you're doing copper testing, one of the things that I found out a while ago is that we can take and reference one main to up to 8 remotes. And this would be actual remotes and other mains acting as remotes. Now, why would we want to reference one main to 8 remotes? Because if I'm doing a bunch of testing and I've got a number of people out at the wall jack end and I'm in the wiring closet, I could be doing tests out to multiple ends and having different people running around with different remotes, all doing the testing at the same time. So each one of our mains will support being referenced to up to 8 remotes. That's kind of a neat little one. All right. So one other one that I wanted to show you in here is that, typically we use the Versiv for going out and testing to make sure that our cable is good, that we're certifying our cable. Well, one other little use that we found for the Versiv that's pretty good is being able to test if an Ethernet connection's working. So we're going to move this Versiv out of the way. I'm going to grab a different Versiv right here. Let me bring that camera back up again. Okay, so in this case, what I've got is I've got my Versiv set up right here, and over on the side we have an Ethernet port. In fact, let me turn this light back on there. So we've got our Ethernet port right there. In fact, you know what? Let me stop sharing so we got a better look at that. Got that Ethernet port right there. So all I want to know is this cable right here a good Ethernet connection? So I could come in and I can plug that in right there. Okay, so I get my link lights. That is great. That's exactly what I wanted to see. And if I come in here and I go to Tools and I go to Network, right there, what this does is this shows me the IP address I got on this. So I got an IP address of 10.0.11.142. My subnet mask is a 24-bit mask. My default gateway, my DNS servers. So that's fantastic. That tells me that I am getting an IP address with that. And so I know that that cable's good. Now we're going to switch something around here. I'm going to grab this cable. We're going to flip this over. And we're going to unplug that. We're going to just put something a little bit different in here. Let's see if we can figure out what's going on. Okay, so I put a different cable in there. So now we're going to flip over. We're going to plug back in to that Ethernet port right there. And there, oh, we got our link comes on, goes off. Comes on, goes off. Huh. That's kind of weird. So we're kind of getting a link, but we're not getting a link. So what the heck is going on with that? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to unplug that, and I'm going to come up here to the top. I'm going to plug it into my channel adapter. Okay, so I've got a channel adapter in my Versiv right here. I've got my DSX 5000 module in there. So now I've plugged that in. And so what I'm going to do is, let's do this. We're going to plug a good Ethernet cable into that. And we are going to switch around our VNC right here. Let me share that. All right. So here is our tester. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back up to my home screen. And I've got this set up to do a TIA Cat5e channel test. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to hit test on here. Now keep in mind, I have this plugged into what I think is a live Ethernet connection, but it's not connecting. So what we find is that if we connect up to a connection like that, and it can't find a remote at the other end, it's going to start sending a tone out so we can help locate it. Now in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on measure. Okay, and it's running a test on that cable. It's generating the diagnostics, and it said that it failed. Now in this case, what's interesting is we see that pins 1 and 2, 4 and 5, 7 and 8 are all shorted out. But 3.6 ends at 56 feet. So what this is an indication of is that I am running into a situation where my cable is broken somewhere along the way. And I need 3.6 to get 10, 100 gig. So I'm not going to be able to link up if that pin is broken. So now what I've done is I've used my Versiv as a way to check and see if I'm getting a good Ethernet connection, I'm getting a DHCP address. If I'm not, I can then turn around, plug my channel adapter in, and I can use that as a way to test that link and find out what's going on. Now, if I go in and I unplug the other end of that link to get a little bit better idea of what's going on, I'm going to say test again. So once I unplug it from that switch, I don't get the shorted out pins anymore. So we're going to come in and we're going to say measure. All right, so now in this case, what we see is that 1, 2, 4, 5, 7, 8 are 161 feet long, roughly. And 3, 6 is 56 feet. So I immediately know where along the path that cable has problems. So now I'm going to go out to that location. I can come out there. I can fix that. So let's see what happens after we repair that cable. So I'm going to say test again. We're going to hit measure on there. And it comes back and it says that all of our cables are roughly the same length. So now we've fixed that. So if I came back in and I plugged that back into the Ethernet port, we'd expect that we'd get a link. Now, we've talked a lot about the Versiv. You know, there is another little tool out there that is handy for troubleshooting these types of things as well. And that's the micro scanner with PoE capabilities in it. So kind of a neat little way. In fact, you know, if we were to take that and plug that in and take a look and see, that not only will show us, now let me switch our cameras here. We'll stop sharing that screen. And I'm going to come in here. We'll switch cameras. Go over here to the GoPro. Now, in that case, if I came in with my little, you know, micro scanner right there and turn that on, what that's going to show me, if I plug that in, that tells me I'm connected at 10, 100, 1000, and it tells me I've got PoE on that connection. So we can see PoE flash up. So if I come in here and hit PoE, it's going to check and see what kind of PoE I have. It's going to come back and say it's class 802.3, class 3 PoE, and we've got about 13 watts on there. So yeah, I was kind of curious. You know, that's great when I'm negotiating with the switch. When the switch is telling me what it's capable of doing. Let me plug into a PoE injector here real quick. Let's see what it looks like when we have an injector where we don't have that LLDP coming out. So I'm going to plug in there. We're going to go back to our home screen there. Tells us we have PoE. I come in and hit my PoE button. It's going to search for my PoE. In this case, it tells me I'm getting 47.5 volts, and that's coming in on 4578. So, you know, this is actually a really good way to go when it comes to, do I have Ethernet? And if I do have problems with Ethernet, where along the path am I having the problems? However, we may not have this out in the field with us. And it could be that we don't test PoE very often. It could be that that is not a normal part. Actually, it could be that we're not testing even if there's link very often. But there could be a rare case where we need to know. And that is how we can use the Versiv to go in and test for that. Okay. So these are just a few little tips as far as being able to go in and set up those tests without the module in there. Now, on the CCTT training, if you choose to attend either one of our on-site classes, one of our public classes, or one of our online classes, one of the things that we're doing now is you get one of these nifty pens. So we've got these nice little pens that we're sending out. And one thing I like is they've got a stylus there on the end. So that way, if you've got gloves on or something, it makes using the Versiv screen, or you've got big fingers, It makes using the screen on the Versiv really easy. Also, we've got these stickers that we're sending out now. In fact, if you didn't sign up and get your sticker, if you're 2018 certified, we have ones for 2018. We're handing out these 2019s for everyone that passes the test, so you get that sticker. And the cool thing with the sticker is that you can come in, and let's switch over here, and you can put that on your hard hat. So that way, when you're out on the job site, everybody knows that you're CCTT certified. Okay? So we're excited about the online classes. We're excited about all the things that you can do with this equipment. It is a phenomenal piece of equipment for going out and troubleshooting. So if you're building your tests, in future installments of this, we're going to talk about projects a little bit. We're going to talk about Linkware Live, how we can build the project and all of our tests on there and then download them to the tester. But one of the really cool things here is the fact that we can go in and we can set those tests up ahead of time. The more work you do ahead of time in setting up your tests, your test limits, your cable types, all of that, the less likely you are to run into an issue when you get out in the field. All right. Well, it's 8:30. I want to keep these to 30 minutes so that I maximize your time. And so I'm going to take the recorded version. We're going to get that edited up. I'm going to get that uploaded. And so tomorrow at about 8:30 a.m. Pacific time, an email is going to come out. It's going to have a link to the recorded version. It's going to have a link to some videos that Fluke Networks did on these same topics. And it's going to have a link to where you can register for the classes. So if you want to go out to CCTT training, in fact, I'll throw that in the chat window there. CCTTtraining.com, that's got a list of our whole schedule of classes that we've got coming up, how many seats are available in each. So I'd like to thank you for joining me this morning. I hope that you found this useful. I love doing these little things and getting tips and tricks out there to you. So hopefully we'll see you next Thursday doing it at the same time. But we're going to take a break for 4th of July. We'll pick back up again after that. So thanks for joining me, and I hope to see you in a future session.